So this is part 2 of Chad Melton. Just a reminder that not all SMEX offenders are registered. So where I left off was in 2016 when Chad Melton was living with his soon-to-be wife, number 3, I think. Yeah, 3. Her name is Rissa. Sometimes she still goes by Rissa Melton. I don't know if she's got remarried since that point in time, but we'll call her Rissa. So Rissa had that teenage daughter. So it was Rissa, the teenage daughter, Chad's daughter number 2 and 3, and Chad, all living in a 2-bedroom home. At that point in time, the mother of daughter number 2 was still trying to get custody back of her daughter. She had joint custody, but he was the primary custodial parent. So she had just about an equal amount of time with her daughter, but she wanted her daughter back. In order to get her daughter back, she had phone calls being automatically recorded. Because the phone calls were being automatically recorded, she accidentally recorded a phone call, and in that phone call, she found out some information that should have been shocking, to be quite honest. A woman we'll call MS called the mother of daughter number 3 and told her that her stepdaughter had came to visit her, and on that visit, her stepdaughter told her that several years earlier, Chad Melton had inappropriately touched her while they were on a family trip around the Christmas holiday. Now, that teenager, who was at that point an adult, told her stepmother that she would have been 12 or 13 years old at the time that assault occurred. The stepmother contacted the mother of daughter number 3 because they were concerned about the yeast infections that daughter number 3 had been having recurrently. I mean, I guess it wasn't recurrent. It was just that it was never healing. And the reason that teenager came forward was because she was visiting the home of Chad's mother when Chad's mother made the statement that she wondered if someone was inappropriate touching Chad's daughter number 3 because daughter number 3 was having these horrendous yeast infections. Except she thought daughter number 3 was being inappropriately touched at her mother's home. When this teenager heard that information, she automatically, I believe, went back into her mind when she was inappropriately touched by Chad and felt like, oh no, Chad's probably doing that to this child. And she just wanted somebody to know. Now, admittedly, the mother of daughter number 3 kept that information to herself. She did have an attorney that told her at the time that if she brought that up in court, that the judge at the time, Mac McCain, would likely feel like it was an effort to get Chad to lose custody and that it actually wasn't the truth and would do no good but to put the mom in a worse position in custody court, family court. So things went on as they were for a while. Chad had custody of daughters number 2 and 3. He was married to Rissa, had her daughter, teenage daughter, living in the home. Rissa told people that Chad had started getting very jealous of her teenage daughter, especially around the time that she turned 16 years old and started being able to drive and leave the house when she wanted to and having boyfriends. Chad was incredibly jealous. Also, allegedly, there was an incident with that teenager who is not biologically related to Chad, where that teenager allegedly went hunting with Chad, which had been a regular thing, came back and acted completely different, and from that point forward, never went hunting with Chad again. Rissa told people that she felt that Chad had done something to her daughter, but did she do anything to help her daughter? No, she didn't. Did she do anything to protect any of the children that were in that home? No, she didn't. it actually eventually came out that there were multiple times that DHS visited that home due to reports that daughter number 2 was being physically abused by Chad in that home. And also, it came out that daughter number 2 told Rissa multiple times that Chad was inappropriately touching and graping her. And Rissa told her she was a liar. The thing is, I think that you have to know that Chad, from the point that daughter number 2 came to live with Chad, I think that probably initially Chad was kind to her, but daughter number 2 rejected Chad because she didn't know him. And Chad didn't like that. He didn't like being rejected by daughter number 2. So that's when he started treating her poorly. And I believe that there were probably some behavioral issues, but from the point that Chad started treating daughter number 2 poorly, he started telling anybody who would listen what a liar daughter number 2 was. Oh, Chad asked her if she had done her homework, and she said yes when the answer was actually no. She's a liar. She lies about everything. Here's the thing, though, the thing that I have thought about since I learned this information. If it was going to keep me from getting my ass handed to me, keep me from having a grown man beat my ass, I would have lied too. And you can't convince me that most people wouldn't make that same decision. Chad told everyone that daughter number 2 was a liar. All the while, he was graping daughter number 2. And you can't convince me that this wasn't strategic on Chad's part. Because let's go a little bit further down the road. Chad and Rissa decide to divorce. But Rissa is still actively sleeping with Chad. She's actively sleeping with Chad, even though she filed for an order of protection. Now, that order of protection was dropped by her. But yeah, Chad visited her home frequently where her daughter was trying to feel safe without Chad. Chad, something you have to know about him is that he doesn't go without someone to take advantage of for very long. So he moved right on, quick, fast, and in a hurry. Not only did he have a baby with one woman, but then he impregnated a second woman who had 2 children close together, daughter number 4 and a son. Now, I will say that it seems that from what I have heard, the mother of daughter number 4 has done a very good job, especially at this point in time, of keeping Chad away from her daughter. So I'm not really going to say anything about her. I don't have anything to add, and that child isn't a victim. But then Chad married another woman, the woman who he had his son with. Chad married her, and pretty soon after Chad married her, daughter number 2 went to that woman and told that woman that Chad had raped her. And from all accounts, that woman initially believed Chad until Chad reminded her what a liar daughter number 2 was. So from everything that I have seen, that woman also did not tell anyone until the end of April 2021, when the children were removed from the home because someone finally reported to DHS that Chad was graping daughter number 2. So both daughters were taken from the home. Now, the woman who had the son, she had a son from a previous relationship, and she was able to keep both of her sons in the home around Chad, but the daughters were taken into DHS custody. Chad sat in DHS court and told DHS that he didn't want to have any kind of visitation or repair any kind of relationship with daughter number 2, which is fine because daughter number 2 didn't want to see him anyway. Chad was hyper-focused on daughter number 3. He wouldn't leave daughter number 3 alone. Every time he had visitation with her, he was again showering her with gifts, and DHS was sitting there and watching it. Didn't say anything about it, even though investigators and counselors agreed that daughter number 3 was being groomed by Chad and had been being groomed for a very long time. After the daughters were taken away from Chad and placed in DHS custody, it came out from the mother of daughter number 3 that Chad had actually inappropriately touched daughter number 3 one time while the child was in the shower. The child was, if my math is correct, about 6 years old at the time. Chad was bathing the daughter and said his finger slipped. The mother of daughter number 3 was convinced that it was an accident, but even still, she warned Chad that should anything like that ever happen again, he would regret it. Now, I will say that from information that I have received, that mother did tell the investigator, when the investigator was investigating the claims of daughter number 2, about the incident with daughter number 3. Chad was charged with rape and SA for the incidents with daughter number 2. Unfortunately, at some point in time, those charges were dismissed by the prosecutor. The head of that prosecution office is Jeff Phillips. So do with that information what you will. I've seen people get shorter sentences for having CSAM on their devices or inappropriately touching children than they got for being in possession of a controlled substance in that county at the hands of Jeff Phillips. So again, do with that information what you will. It isn't really a surprise, in my opinion, that the charges were dropped. But it's important to know that the reason the charges were dropped is that whenever the investigator went through all of the information, there were 4 victims that came forward. One of them being a biological relative of Chad, the teenager, who is now an adult. One of them being daughter number 2. One of them being a child that was left in the home that was not biologically related to Chad. You can figure that out on your own. And I do not actually know the identity of the 4th victim. And you're probably thinking, like, bro, there are 4 victims. Why were the charges dropped? The charges were dropped because the child that was teenager, that was living in the home, that was not biologically related to Chad, changed her story. Not only did she change her story, but when changing her story, she said that the reason that she said that Chad had done something to her was because the father of that teenage victim that was biologically related to Chad, that is now an adult, that woman's father forced her, threatened her into saying that Chad had done something inappropriate to her. Now, I believe, in my opinion, that the reason that this was done was, again, strategic on Chad's part. I think, in my opinion, and what do I know, but I think that by having this girl say that, hey, this man that's related to this woman who is, supposed to testify as a 404B witness in your case, forced me to say that, it kind of puts that woman's story into question, along with this person changing her story, which only leaves half of the victims that you had before that have reliable stories. And he's told everybody that the main victim, daughter number 2, is a liar. And I think that just didn't leave much of a case, unfortunately. But again, I feel that the story, the incident of daughter number 2 should have stood on its own. Now, I'm sorry that this is all taking so long. I'm sure you're like, lady, get to the point, man. You're long-winded. And I am. I apologize. But there are just a lot of details, and I feel like you have to know all the little intricate details because there are so many players and so many victims at the hands of this man. Now, he was not charged for anything that happened with daughter number 3. He was not charged with grooming, even though just about everybody involved felt that it was actual grooming that he was doing to daughter number 3. But those charges got dropped. And when those charges got dropped, the mother of daughter number 3, within 2 months, turned around and gave Chad custody back of that daughter. Went right back to to a similar joint custody arrangement that they had before. Now, they didn't go before a judge. What happened was they had an attorney draw up paperwork, mom signed it, and then that paperwork was passed before the judge on the case, Judge Mac McCain, and Judge Mac McCain signed off on it. He signed off on the paperwork even though Chad should have never been given custody of that child again. After all of the accusations that came forward and all of the victims that didn't even know each other. No one knew about the first victim, the teenager, when she told her stepmother. No one knew that that victim existed but the stepmother, the victim, and the mother of daughter number 3. Those are the only people that knew about that. And still there were all of these other people that came forward. All these other victims that came forward. Survivors of Chad Melton.